Well, Ben, welcome.
Appreciate
You
it.
being here today.
Absolutely.
Maybe you could kind of start off by giving us a little bit of background on yourself, who you are, what you do, where you come from.
Sure. So I'm Chief Operating Officer here at Left Coast Holdings, and my background's pretty eclectic. So I actually started in the fitness industry, owned my own coaching company out there for about a decade. Did everything from brick and mortar gyms to online coaching, nutrition platform. It's an interesting industry to start in because you kind of have to learn all the different aspects of business, whether it's operations or marketing, sales, everything in between.
Yep.
It's a very bootstrappy type of business as well. There's a lot of competition, and so I think it taught me a lot of the fundamentals of running a business that I've been able to carry over into the cannabis world.
Sure.
It's helped quite a bit as we've gone through things. So in 2016, I moved from Chicago back to California, where I'm originally from, and started a cannabis company up in Northern California. You know how cannabis is, very convoluted history of multiple entities and multiple pivots, and sort of trying to navigate that original legal market in California as it moved from the Prop 215 days to the medical or to the rec days. And what we ultimately ended up with was a parent company that we formed with a group from Southern California that had started a brand called Steezy, which had really...
I've heard of them.
Yeah, right. They were very popular in LA at the time and kind of starting to branch out into other areas of California. So we kind of took the helm up in Northern California and did all their distribution and some of their manufacturing for them. And then we ended up partnering up officially and created Shrine Group, which is, most people know today, one of the major players in California.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I ended up transitioning from there in 2020, ended up moving back to Chicago, and one day I was up in Michigan showing a friend around and told him I knew a couple cool guys that owned a company up in northern Michigan. Came up here to Manistee and was like, man, you guys have done a lot. I was
Yeah.
very impressed.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it's a good time.
That was an
So
interesting meeting. That was cool.
we ended up joining forces, and here we are. Right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the cannabis industry is so young. You're about as veteran as it gets, right? Like 26.
On the legal side,
Yeah,
I'd
on the,
say,
on the
yeah,
legal
pretty much,
side,
yeah.
right? And we're
Yeah.
talking rec market here. So,
Right.
just in the last 5 years, things have evolved so much. Like, what are some of the major changes that you've seen in the industry over the last 5 years?
It's interesting because I have experience in two different markets, so I'm kind of seeing there's a certain evolution that's state-based, and there's kind of like an overarching evolution that's more national. And I think where that's really come into play in Michigan is that there's been a faster evolution in this state than there was in California or like Colorado or some of these other states that kind of started the process. And what I mean by evolution, there's an evolution from a company perspective and there's an evolution from a customer perspective. So from the company perspective, starting in the medical days, packaging, quality control, efficiencies of scale, that kind of thing weren't necessarily at the forefront of the mind.
Sure.
There was a lot of people using other brands' IP and just slapping labels on the stuff, and kind of messy and sort of like
Primitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And that carried over in the beginning, but I think that as more and more competitors came into the space, companies realized they had to sort of start working on some of this stuff like a company in another industry. And so we've seen a sort of a maturity of cannabis companies themselves. But on the flip side, we've also seen an evolution in the consumer, because as more people become experienced with the modalities that are on the market, they kind of move in a progression from, let's say, like flavored distillate-based vapes,
Right.
start trying maybe a live resin vape product as an example. Maybe they move into a live resin extract. On the flower side, they start with those strains that they know very well, the sour diesels, the OG Kush, then they kind of start branching out into some more of the exotic stuff, and so they become more knowledgeable in the market. Their tastes tend to change quite a bit is what we've seen. Yeah.
Right. Start off enjoying things that taste like bubble gum, and then as they evolve, they start enjoying the taste of the plant. They want things where you can actually taste the full spectrum, the terpenes, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like wine, right? Like a lot of people, when they start drinking wine, they like the rosé and some of the, yeah, exactly. Boot Farm, don't ask me how I know that. And as their tastes evolve, they often will move into more complex varieties and brands that are not necessarily for the beginner.
Sure. So like from a company culture perspective, I think one of the things that's happened, I do come from the Prop 215 days, right? So like Hills in Northern California.
Yep.
And I would have, back in the day it was trimmigrants, right? So we would have people from all over the world working on our farms, France, Estonia, Spain, Portugal, like everywhere.
Your own cousin.
Yeah, my cousin from Spain. And, we would hear horror stories about people working for an entire season and then getting packed up into a van and dropped off at the bottom of the hill, right? Without money.
Right.
So that's kind of like the unfortunate history of company culture in the cannabis industry, right? It comes from kind of a dark place.
Right.
So, and we've seen that kind of progress into like the early medical shops, right? There's no regulation. People are paid cash under the table, underpaid, Obviously there's really no regulation, so what are you going to do? You're not going to go to OSHA about this stuff.
Harassment.
Exactly. Harassment. So there's a lot of shit like this. There's a ton of turnover. And so the industry is continuing to evolve into a place where company culture is becoming really important, and maintaining employees, having a comfortable and safe workplace. So like, what have you seen in your experience from starting when, at JBTV in 2016 to now? Like, how has company culture evolved in cannabis?
I didn't mention this, but I actually went to high school in Humboldt County. So my experience with sort of the medical and cannabis culture in general started quite a bit earlier than 2016. Yeah. So a lot of my graduating class in high school actually went down to the southern Humboldt Hills and started growing probably right next door to you.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I've seen a huge difference. It kind of goes back to the maturity of the companies like we talked about. I think a company's maturation isn't just about the types of products that it puts out or the quality control. It's about the entire way that they conduct themselves. Respecting compliance regulations is an example, right? There's a lot of cowboys early on in the industry that really didn't see a value to staying compliant. There's still some of those in certain areas, but by and large, you're sort of seeing a shift to people trying to play the game because they have a lot to lose.
Right.
Definitely company culture is huge. I've always been big into company culture, and I think that if you can't keep your people happy, you're not getting the best from them. And if you're not getting the best from them in this type of industry, it's too competitive. You can't compete. Yeah. You have to have people that love their job and want to come in and give their all. The ingenuity that everyone has, I mean, in our company, like every single person in this company has brought ideas to the table, amazing ideas. Doesn't matter who you are, and I love that collaborative atmosphere. And I think that only comes if you have a good company culture,
Yeah. I think that's certainly one of the things that I've been most impressed with about, your operations division is the attitudes of the people when you go to the farm or the processor, the buy-in that they have for what they're doing, and then the amount of ownership that they take in their job, and the fact that they are innovating. They're not just there doing what's told, what they're told 8 hours a day. They're actually thinking about what they're doing, and they're coming up with better ways to do it.
Absolutely, and that really speaks to Charlie and Tyler, our directors in particular. I got to give them credit for all of that because they're great leaders, and it's a challenge wrangling, especially on cultivation side. It's a challenge wrangling farmers together, and especially those that have come from maybe a legacy background, and maybe they think they have the most experience, and there's some power dynamics that play in the beginning, and it's hard to come into a environment like that and be able to command respect and inspire the team to get together under the same flag and move forward. Manufacturing is very similar, and yet these guys have done a really great job with that. I mean, to be honest, like at this point, my job is really just to support them. I mean, I don't actually micromanage anything, and I like it that way. I think micromanaging is a huge issue in this industry, especially in the more immature companies, and that's part of that maturation process, is having the confidence in your team and spending the time finding those good people in the first place, and then helping build them to where you don't need to feel like you're the only one that can make decisions, and that more likely they're going to make a better decision because they know it better, right? They're doing it every day.
Doing it every day. Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I think that the cultivation department is where that is kind of the most prevalent, right? Because out of the, cultivation, manufacturing, and retail divisions, like cultivation is the one that has the most history. You have people who have been growing, as caregivers or in the medical market for quite some time. So they're actually coming in with some of their own experience. And then you have to get them on board with your systems, your processes, and have them buy into what you're doing versus what they've historically done, right?
Yeah, and that's something that I think you and I have created a really good system that's a little different than the other way other companies do it, where we have brought in a 2-person team to run departments instead of just one. So example, in cultivation, we've got Chris Diaz, and he's got, 25 years of growing experience. I mean, very knowledgeable grower. But it's hard for one person to run an entire company and not only manage and control the processes and sort of quality control and everything related to the technical side of stuff, but also to be able to manage the people, do all the background, financials and spreadsheets and projections and everything else that comes with running a mature operation. So, we kind of like experimented with it in a sense, and we said, all right, let's take the director, let's have them run the department from a traditional, more corporate perspective, and let's bring in that tech lead, as we call them, to keep control of the processes and make sure that we're growing the best weed, not just profiting or keeping our costs down, but actually growing high quality weed. Same thing in manufacturing. Let's make sure we're manufacturing super high quality products and innovating, and not just copying what everyone else is doing and following in line. This industry requires innovation and moving the needle forward, and that's how you get on the map, I think, for sure.
Yeah. And when I look at those guys, like specifically that team, Chris and Charlie, that seems to me like a meeting of art and science, right? Where Chris is a guy who's smelled and grown so much weed, you can put a bud of anything in front of his nose and he'll tell you the genetics and where it comes from, which is something that like blows my mind.
Yeah.
I used to bring him with me to buy weed because I would get fooled all the time.
Yeah. He's like a bloodhound.
He's like a fucking bloodhound with the weed. And then you got Charlie, who's like a damn scientist, right? And so you have this master grower and this scientist working together and coming up with tons of respect for each other too, which is the other part, right? Like there's no infighting there. They're like both putting their heads together, coming up with the best way to do things. And so I think that like in terms of a way forward in this industry, to like show deference to the people who were doing this before, and then to also keep up with the times and go forward in a positive direction. That's like the best of both worlds, right?
Absolutely, and I think this is epitomized in the sort of banging of heads between left coast, east coast, or legacy, evolved market versus like the MSO corporate market, right?
Correct.
You've got the guys that are running the companies in California. Many of them came from the medical market, or even we'll call it the gray market. And you've got the MSOs out here in Illinois and New York and whatnot, and they're often started by Wall Street executives and other I'll say business-minded people in the sense that they
Chads.
And I don't like that term, because I think both sides need to come together. I think the real key to success for the consumer in particular, right? Because like at the end of the day, we're doing this for the consumer. So how do we make great products but also provide enough volume that it's accessible to everybody?
Yeah.
It requires both sides of the coin. And so that's, the MSOs by and large don't really respect the legacy guys. They think they don't really know what they're doing from a corporate perspective, which there's certain things that they don't know, right? But that's where the value of the MSO comes into play. And then the legacy guys know the market, they know the consumer, they've been doing this for decades.
Right.
So if they can lose that sort of mudslinging type of mentality,
right,
whoever does that first, and I haven't really seen it yet, right? Look at the MSOs. I mean, some of the legacy guys are getting big enough that they're getting to that status, and they may be the one that does it. Right. But if, you know, I just posted this morning about it in Illinois, because there's a lot of guys that are coming in from California now into the market, and you know, they're not going to enjoy that restricted type of environment anymore, where they've been able to put out products that maybe their quality is okay. They're not the highest quality by any means, and their right. brands are not exciting to the consumers. You know, I've lived in California most of my life. I obviously work in Michigan, and I currently live in Illinois, so I see all three. And I mean, consumers out here know the brands that they love, and most of the brands that they love came from caregiver days, right? Right. Consumers in California love certain brands. Most of them are legacy brands. You know, you got 710 Labs, you got Jungle Boys, Alien Labs. Like, some of these guys have been around for a long time. Yeah. And you know, when they start going into these other markets and the consumer gets a taste for that and what that can bring, I think it's going to be a little bit of a challenge if these other guys don't say, hey, we actually need to open ourselves up to learning more about the customer and like what really drives that excitement. Because if they can bring that with the bank accounts that they have and the economies of scale, then that's going to be something really to contend with, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. One of the interesting parts about the cannabis industry is that, like, we're vertically integrated, especially with the way the markets are right now. It's almost crucial to be vertically integrated in order to be successful, right? The markets are way down. Yeah. And it's interesting, when a state opens up, there's this huge sprint for companies to win licenses, open assets. There's really no focus on profitability or EBITDA. And so what's your thought, like, looking forward? Because obviously we've seen how it's worked out in other states before, right? There's this huge sprint, then there's a glut, the market collapses, people fall out, and then, you know, the strong companies survive and move forward in a more stabilized market. When you're looking at states that are opening up, New York, New Jersey, what's the model there? Do you start small, build and stabilize, or do you sprint and hope to survive?
I mean, 'tis the challenge of the cannabis industry, right? Like, unlike more mature markets, you kind of have to, like, balance both aspects to a certain degree. That being said, I think that smaller players need to realize that they're not an MSO. There's a lot of stuff that MSOs have that they don't. They have capital and they have access to capital primarily, right? And so being able to go into a new market and just blast out and get up and operational quickly is a lot easier for them. They also have the manpower. You know, when you have a huge team of people, you can peel part of that off for a new market. When you're dealing with a skeleton crew, you really can't do that, and you're just adding more headache to a team that's probably already overworked as it is. So I think that definitely don't want to get too big for your britches and get over yourself too much, because you can go to business like that, right? So at the same time, starting too small, you miss the boat. It's a fast-moving industry. So there's some luck involved, I won't lie, absolutely, and not everyone's going to see that luck. But there's also a lot of financial discipline, not wasting money, being lean, working on COGS, knowing what your COGS are, first of all, knowing how to calculate that, and then knowing how to prioritize which elements of those COGS to focus on so that you can start bringing those down. A quick example, if you got something, say it costs $10 and the input material is $4 and a piece of packaging is 30 cents, right? Are you going to sit there and spend all your time trying to get a few cents off of the packaging, or are you going to figure out how you're going to get $1 off of your input material? Which one's going to have more impact, right?
Right, obviously the input material.
Exactly. So it all goes back to maturation of these companies, right? You have to understand accounting principles. You have to understand operating principles. You can't just put out the product and you'll succeed. It doesn't work like that. You can't just build the facility. You know, I'm going to build a 500,000 square foot facility and put out untold amounts of cannabis in a market that can't even support that supply. It's already oversupplied. Right. That's a recipe for disaster. So I don't have a really good answer to your question, because I think it depends on the market, and I think it depends largely on luck. However, the smartest thing that folks can do is, like, build a foundation, solidify that foundation, build the next level on top, just like building a house. Yeah.
Speaking of COGS, right, I think one of the pitfalls that I've seen you know, both in our business and, you know, I talk to a lot of other people in the state of Michigan and in California, is in this sprint to win these licenses, to get these assets open. Oftentimes the accounting department does not scale with the business, right? And so you wind up at a point 1, 2, 3 years in where you have to do a lot of backtracking to figure out where you stand, and to get your books in order, and then also just to be able to have like good financials to run your business on, right? Like having an accurate P&L to make business decisions on is crucial, right? So how do you see people moving forward and making sure that they're set up correctly?
That's a really hard one, because part of the problem is that to have an effective accountant or controller, they have to be familiar, in my opinion, with vertical integration. In most industries, vertical integration's not a thing. It's not an advantage. It's trying to be a jack of all trades, and really you're operating a bunch of different businesses instead of one.
Right.
Obviously, like you mentioned, in cannabis, depending on the market, I would say in Michigan right now, you wouldn't be able to survive if you're not vertically integrated. I'll be surprised to see if some of these single function operators, even the good ones, are able to get through this pricing compression right now. You know, for us, being able to control it from seed to sale is a lifeline. You know, that being said, so like an accountant that's used to dealing with a single form business, having to all of a sudden deal with intercompany transfers in large scale and moving profit margins around to circumvent 280E tax burdens, and you know, just dealing with the headache that is cannabis in general, it's a lot more difficult, I think. And I'm not an accountant, so I'm somewhat speaking on my ass here, but like I still understand it well enough to know that it's a lot harder. And I've ran businesses that aren't in cannabis, and the accounting's a lot easier. Right. So I think that the good news is that there's enough people in accounting and finance at this point that have been around long enough to do that. So there's probably better services, third party, than maybe we had access to when we first started. Right. But that being said, you know, I really do think that if you can bring somebody in-house who can handle your day-to-day instead of trying to outsource that plays a big part, because then you have a little bit more control over how am I labeling my expenses. Am I labeling my expenses? Am I categorizing them correctly? Am I tagging them so that we have a little bit of flexibility with how we're doing our reporting, right? We don't necessarily just only want to report through one bucket because it's vertically integrated, and there's, you know, am I reporting for tax purposes? Am I reporting for my investors so they can see maybe the true profitability, and not, you know, how we're moving the money around to reduce our tax load, right? Sure. So yeah, I think it'll be easier as time goes on, but that's always going to be a challenge for a new company, because they don't always have the funds to bring somebody in-house up front. So making sure you're vetting the services that you're using in general, but especially accounting, is going to save you a lot of money and headache later. Yeah.
What's the importance of branding in cannabis? Like building a brand, you know, do you think that's part of the move forward?
I mean, to me, a brand is more than this. You know, there's CPG brands, right? Brands that are on the shelf. But I think if you run a company, you have a brand, regardless of what you do, right? You always have customers. Someone's paying your bills, and the way that you portray yourself to them is your brand image. So I think the first step is figuring out who are you and what do you want to be, right? You can't be someone you're not, first off, and second of all, if you're trying to build a brand that isn't reflecting who you are, then it's not going to connect with the customer. So figuring out who you are and what you want to do. Are you trying to build a CPG brand? Then absolutely you need a solid brand, right? Unless you're in a restricted market and you can kind of artificially control. In an open market like Michigan or California, your brand image is probably the most important thing. I'd say more important than quality, actually. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of really high quality product out there, especially in California, coming from some of these legacy growers that don't necessarily have the scalability, the marketing knowledge and everything else, and a lot of them are struggling even though their product might be amazing. Right. And there's a lot of brands that have a little bit less stellar product, and some of them are absolutely crushing because they know how to connect with the customer, right? And it's like that in every industry. So yeah.
And I really think that speaks to kind of like like you see the licensing model, right? Big brands from California licensing their brand into other states,
Right.
and putting out product that, you know, may not be of the same quality as you know, kind of what they originated with,
Right.
but still seeing a lot of success in these other states.
Yep.
Putting out product that might not be up to par, right?
Absolutely. There's also the flip side, which is the risk, though, because if that goes too far into the negative, they can hurt their brand image, right? So if a company's in California and they're well known and they have a good reputation for quality, and you know, more advanced users respect them, there is a risk as they go into another market where they release a subpar product and the people there are like, why is this so popular in California or, you know, Oregon or wherever it's from? This sucks. And then that word gets back and it can make the company look a little amateur. So I think Cookies has done a really good job because they, as far as I can tell, do not expand their operations anywhere.
Right.
They just do licensing, and I know there's been some hiccups, but like in Illinois, I know the first run of Cookies flour wasn't up to par, and they didn't let it be released, and that was smart, very smart. So
Gotta do it.
I think it can be done either way. I know there are companies that try to, you know, manage operations in every state they go into, and I know some that do kind of a hybrid approach, and I think you have to be flexible and do what works for your company, right? As long as you can maintain that sort of consistency as best you can, then I think you'll be good.
Yeah. From a marketing standpoint, obviously there are some challenges marketing cannabis brands. You can't do a lot of the traditional stuff online. You have been part of a company who's been really successful marketing and building an enormous brand. What are some of the things that someone who's wanting to start a cannabis brand can do to be successful marketing and building their brand?
Well, first off, you know,
Have shitloads of money.
Well,
That's the answer.
I mean, Steezy's marketing success is because of their marketing team, especially Jackie. She was, you know, absolutely amazing and understood the LA market better than, I mean, that was their thing, is they didn't just understand their market, they were their market, I should say, especially in LA, right? Like they're a trendsetter.
Right.
And I think that makes a big difference. But that being said, like a lot of the tricks of the trade back then have already changed. Like things change so often that it's hard to like look back more than a year and really see something that's relevant. So I know nowadays there's a lot of, you know, there's sort of peeling back the layers of traditional marketing. And yeah, you still can't, you know, advertise on TikTok, can't advertise on Instagram, can't advertise on Facebook. That's a huge problem. There's workarounds to be able to advertise on Google Ads. You know, POS systems are moving towards, or not POS, but the e-commerce systems, the menus are moving away from like an iframe, which is impossible to search engine optimize, to a more integrated solution where you can actually optimize the individual product pages, which from a dispensary level allows you to start marketing specific products, which can, you know, potentially change the game a little bit. But I think really focusing on the customers and connecting with them old school is the way to go, personally. Like, it's an old school market. Like, people like the connection. They like to know that the brands know them and care about them. And sometimes it's a real narrow, small effort that you only touch a few people, but that gets captured and, you know, shown to the wider market. It means a lot. So whether that's doing a community cleanup, hosting a party for bud tenders, you know, doing some other sort of charitable community enhancement project, showing that you're not just there to make money on the backs of people and trash the place in the process, but that you actually respect every locale that you're in, I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Field marketing, guerrilla marketing,
yep.
Community involvement, all those things are huge. And then obviously really understanding your customer, who they are, what they do, what they like.
And that's every marketing 101, right?
Right?
It's like, if you don't understand your customer, then you're not going to succeed. And I think that's a big problem with cannabis, is they just, a lot of companies, like, it's a cannabis customer.
Right.
It's the culture, right?
Right.
There's only one. So they just say, oh, I'm going to make this product, I'm going to put a fancy label on it, and I'm not going to define what the brand image is or what the message is or who my target avatar is or any of that stuff that you're supposed to do. I'm just going to throw it out there, and then no one really connects with it, and it doesn't work, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
A lot of confusion out there in brands.
Absolutely, yep.
So tell me a little bit about lean operations, what it is and why it's important in cannabis.
So it's making sure you eat less than you burn. No, it's funny because it came from the fitness world, you know, doing operations like, yeah, lean. There we go. It's my jam. But no, I mean, lean's all about waste, waste elimination, I should say. So I won't give too much on the history of it. You can look it up online. But long story short, it was developed as a method of manufacturing automobiles, and it's carried over into other industries as a way to get really efficient and reduce the amount of working capital that you need to perform your operations. But I like it because it's so much more than that. It's really about company culture, actually, because waste can mean anything from an unhappy worker that isn't working at their top potential, or you know, a conflict amongst workers that causes the production to slow down because you've got to deal with that conflict, or somebody getting injured on site, or the quality not being up to par, and so you have to go back and rework the products, right, to fix the problem.
Sure.
Because all those things increases cost, time, and reduces output, right? So I think in our case, the areas we really focus on right now are cost efficiencies, really from labor. So how can we do the same work with either fewer people or in less time, and fewer reworking, right? So making sure the quality is where it needs to be the first time around, having those second set of eyes looking at things. I've seen a lot of posts online about, you know, products going out empty, or the label doesn't even have like the right product on it and stuff, and that's just usually a sign that there's not really a quality control check throughout that production process, right? One person's dealing with the product labeling or filling or whatever it is, and there's no one checking their work. I think every action should have somebody else checking it for the most part, right? That's how you get those fresh set of eyes, because otherwise some of that stuff gets pretty monotonous, right? And you get in a flow, and you may not realize, hey, I was switching to another product, and that creates a bad experience for the customer. Yeah. In the case of a manufacturer, their customers are the retailers, but that can even go a step further, and then it's the actual end customer, and regardless, they're going to associate that with the brand, right?
Sure.
So getting really good on costs is super important in the Michigan market. Pricing has come down so much, margins are getting shrunk, and if you can't get your costs down, you're not going to be able to profit. And in fact, you may lose money doing stuff.
Absolutely.
If you're trying to scale, same exact thing, right? So if you have to tie up a ton of your working capital in, for instance, held inventory, that's a big one. So the inventory management in cannabis is not, by and large, not as advanced as other industries, in my experience. It tends to be, hey, let's keep X amount of product on hand at a time, like par inventory system, like what they do in a restaurant, sure, as opposed to maybe something that's a little more advanced, like what's the least amount of inventory we can keep on hand but still not run out.
Sure.
Because there's also a cost to running out of inventory, right? If you make a sale and you don't have any inventory on hand, you lose that sale, or it delays and they might have bought 2 sales in that amount of time, or whatever it is. But there's definitely a big cost to holding inventory. Huge cost for some people, depending on the product as well. So let's say
that would be just-in-time inventory versus just-in-case inventory?
In a sense, although I think the COVID pandemic has shown that full just-in-time inventory systems aren't necessarily robust enough to withstand disruption of the supply chain.
Right,
so
supply chain issues.
A lot of cannabis companies buy their stuff from China, and China's still got issues with shipping, and you know, that's a lot of eggs to put in one basket. So I think having a little bit of both. So on the just-in-case side, having safety stock, and using sales projections and historical sales to sort of track what that needs to look like. Cannabis is quite seasonal, especially a lot of the areas we're at with tourist season and stuff. So being able to kind of you know, move up or down that needle a little bit depending on the time of year, and like, are we releasing a new SKU? Do we expect that to grow quickly? Do we need to carry a little more safety stock because we don't know what that product's performance is going to be compared to something that's more established? There's a lot of different factors that go into it, but bottom line is you carry some amount of safety stock, and then you only order enough outside of that to sort of replenish the amount that you need to never really eat into your safety stock, right? So it's a similar approach, but a little bit different, but the impact is big, because it allows you to carry as little stock as you need of stuff.
Is there a period of time that you have mapped out for your inventory, or?
It depends on the department and kind of the operation, right? So in our company, we've got inventory management at retail, we've got inventory management at manufacturing, and we have inventory management at cultivation.
Right.
Our outdoor cultivation, I'll start with that. That's a one season, like once a year type of thing, right? So that being said, we don't always buy stuff at the beginning of the year, because then you're tying up all your capital for the whole year. Right. So if it makes sense, we might split that into multiple purchases, fertilizer, trellis material, whatever it is, depends on the product.
Right.
But the bottom line is, like, that's kind of like a 1 year cycle. When you move into manufacturing, the cycle shortens a little bit. And, obviously we service our own in-house brand, our stores, and we also service third-party stores. So demand's coming from multiple areas. But being able to keep enough product on hand to service both of those, you have to keep a little bit more product on hand than you would at the retail, because, for example, with the vapes, they have to go through testing. That takes close to a week.
Right.
So there's a big lead time on some of these products, which you're not going to see that in a lot of other industries that don't have to go through that. It's like they can make it as fast as they can. Sometimes they produce the thing after someone orders the product.
Right.
Can't do that in cannabis if people are waiting forever for their product. So you have to keep some product on hand. As you move into retail, you're talking about probably a weekly cadence, right?
Yeah.
And I know you had a conversation with Krista about kind of retail ops in general. I don't know if you guys touched on that, but I think a weekly purchase where, let's say it's every Friday, they go into the inventory room, they look and see what they have, and they say, what do I need to bring in to last me until next week's reorder, right?
Right.
With a little bit of safety stock left over for, it's a holiday and someone comes in and more people come in or whatever. But that's a very different way than a lot of stores operate. They say, load me up with as much products as I can afford right now.
Right.
Oh man, we're stocked with everything, is great. Not really, because inventory on your shelf is not actually an asset, it's an expense, right?
Right.
It's worth $0 until it's sold.
Right.
It's not worth anything. And people don't look at that. They go, well, my money is invested in these assets. They're not assets because that weed can go bad, and then it's worth nothing. Or someone decides they don't want to buy it. If no one buys it, it's not worth anything,
Trends change, things
Yeah.
that are popular are no longer popular.
All you want to do is make sure you don't lose a sale.
Right.
You don't want to have more than you need, really. So I think companies moving towards a mindset of how do we reduce waste so that we're not wasting money is good, and a lot of companies are forced to do that because they don't have a lot of capital. Some of the bigger guys that have more flush pockets, I think that they struggle with that a little bit because they haven't seen the need.
Right.
But that's going to change because money dries up eventually for everybody. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
How do you judge your managers in a lean operating environment?
Well, I think having a lot of discussions is crucial. Getting a lot of involvement and getting them thinking on that level from the get-go requires collaboration. So there's something called a Gemba walk, which is basically management walks through an operation periodically and just observes and asks questions of the people that are the line workers, and just writes down notes and doesn't make any changes or anything like that, but just observes what's going on.
Makes people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, the first time maybe, but then they get used to it, know. And again, if you're asking people questions, right, it's not in an interrogative way, but like learning from them.
Sure.
They actually kind of feel a sense of ownership typically, right? You're not going in saying, I know what you need to do, you do this, you do this. You're saying, hey, tell me about how you're doing this job and where are you seeing gaps?
Right.
Are there things that are problematic? Are there areas that we can improve on? So you're giving them, so that not only handles the part about learning what's going on, which is crucial, but it also gives your people a chance to take ownership in the improvement process, which you should be doing all the time, which is another lean principle. It's called Kaizen. So you've got this Gemba walk, you do this regularly, then the management team pulls back and has a meeting, and you kind of go over the collected notes and you say, all right, like, what are we going to do about these? Which ones are priorities and what are we going to do about it? You put something into, kind of build something out, go put it into play, test it. Does it work? Does it fix it? Does it make it worse? If it makes it better, then great. And you just repeat that process, right? If it doesn't make it better, you pull back, go back to where you were, try something else. It's the process of improvement. I mean,
sure.
It's not, Lean's nice because it's flexible and you can make it as complicated or as simple as you want. I am like simplicity, so I don't need to make things like too academic or get too deep into the spreadsheets with it. It's really just like, let's look and see what's going on, and do we understand our own operations? And that's why I like those Gemba walks, because they force the leadership to understand their operations. And I've been in organizations before where folks that were in charge of certain things didn't understand them fully, and it was a disaster because they were putting in processes and stuff that didn't make sense. Like, it made sense on paper, but like if you knew anything about the actual operation, you're like, there's no way that's going to work, and it didn't. Right. And it just caused a bunch of headaches. So I think that's huge.
Sure. Does this come from Japan?
Yeah, it does. Yep. Toyota.
I was guessing.
Yeah.
Makes sense. What kind of key performance indicators do you use with your managers for obviously for performance, but also for bonuses and keeping them on track?
So I actually let the directors come up with the KPIs themselves.
Okay.
Get a lot more buy-in and make sure that I like them to be challenging but not impossible. So actually what we do is we set, I'll step back a little bit. So we set goals for the year, sure, break them up into quarters, and then we assign a stretch goal to each one of those goals. So the regular goal is what they should hit if they do their job well. The stretch goal is like something that is almost impossible. Still realistic enough that, there's a world where that could happen, but right, not easy by any stretch of the imagination. And like the goal is that they shoot for that and then hit somewhere between their goal, their original goal, and that stretch goal, which right, means that they'll greatly surpass their goal. And their goal is what's going to help the company, right? Right? So as long as they hit their goal, we're good. But if they move beyond that, then we're in a much better place. So then they go down, they figure out the KPIs that they're going to measure to help measure their progress towards those goals. And then they also flesh out a similar process with their own managers and staff sort of down the list. And each one of those feeds up to sort of our company-wide goals at the top. So some examples of KPIs, I think cultivation is probably the simplest. It's typically a yield KPI, right? So in our field, we're looking at a certain amount of pounds per plant. Right. In our indoors, we're looking at certain pounds per square foot or per light. Manufacturing, it's more about defect rates, throughput. Also, since kind of our product development is wrapped into manufacturing, there's some KPIs around speed to market for certain products. And then at retail, it's really about like not just revenue, but like discounting. So what proportion of our sales are discounted, trying to bring that number down so that we're not building a constant mentality of just being a discount emporium all the time, which is kind of what a lot of shops do. They just throw discounts at the wall and say, all right, we're just going to be the lowest price on everything all the time. And you won't, because someone else is going to come in and say, I'm going to do it 1 cent cheaper. And then you're got to go on and do it 1 cent cheaper. And the customer is just like, we're not going to come to you because of something other than the fact that you may or may not be that cheapest option at that time. Right. So, Krista's been a big help on that front, sort of helping us pivot away from the price war and really honing in on like, what's our customer or what's our company persona from a retail perspective, and how can we focus on other KPIs besides just sales, right? Or just number of customers coming in or whatever. So that's big. And then another big one at retail is the amount of held inventory, which I was talking about earlier, right? So right, keeping those numbers down so we can make sure that we're not, operating in a net negative because we're constantly having to pay off more balance than we're making in the stores. Sure. Yeah.
Can you talk about, on the retail level, managing that inventory? You're not only ensuring freshness of product, you're also managing your cash flow, right?
Yeah.
So, a lot of people in the industry now, there are terms. So right, the idea behind keeping your inventory low would be that maybe you never have to come out of pocket to pay for.
So I mean, coming out of pocket a little bit isn't always a problem, but if you can do it without, other than your initial working capital, if you can kind of keep it within that, that's ideal, right? So keeping like somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks of inventory on hand, and no more than that. If you've got 30-day net terms, then you're going to be able to pay that all off, right? Right. And really, you'll be able to pay it off sooner because you're selling it at cost. But that's kind of like a good rule of thumb, is like, I wouldn't carry more than that,
Sure.
if possible. Now, if it's possible to hone that down even further and get to the point that we're down to 1 week or 2 weeks worth of inventory, that's great, because there's still capital that's freed up by that we can use towards purchasing something else, or you know, bringing in other products, or revamping stores, or whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah, and I think that kind of the historical retail model in cannabis has been to have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars of product on hand.
You want your whole wall filled,
$500,000
bottom to top. You walk in and you want the customer to be overwhelmed, but it's dumb. Why would you want the customer to be overwhelmed?
Right.
That's not a good feeling for the customer. It's not a good experience, and they're less likely to buy a lot of product when they look and they go, I don't even know where to start. Just give me whatever. Like, you want to have, it's like an Apple store, right? Like, you're not going to walk in and have just piles of computers to the ceiling. You've got like really well merchandise product that's sitting on a shelf. It's sleek, it's minimalist, and then people spend thousands and thousands of dollars there. It's the same thing. They're not spending thousands of dollars, but you want to have, each product needs to have a presence. Can't happen if it's smashed around a bunch of others. Going back to the waste discussion, how much time is wasted trying to inventory manage a shop that's got 5,000 SKUs and, you know, rooms where there's so much inventory you can't even store it in the inventory room. It's piling out elsewhere. Every day they've got to take all that out of the storefront, put it in the back room. That is all time wasted and money spent.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, what have we done? We've reduced our SKU load by, I think, 4 times. And our sales have gone up.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
So.
I mean, the results certainly speak for themselves. And so I think about, you know, if you're somebody in New York and New Jersey watching this and you're about to launch, kind of from my perspective, I think about the way that the old stores used to operate. Reminds me of like the Cheesecake Factory model, where you have this like ridiculous menu with so many options, and it's impossible to make a decision that you feel good about, right?
And the food's not going to be ultimately like as fresh as if you go somewhere that's got a chef's selection. That's what you get.
Right. You go to a good restaurant, they have 3 appetizers, 3 entrees, and 3 desserts, and you pick something and you feel good about it, and then your decision is over and you move on with your life.
And the waiter's like, hey, the chef went and picked, I just went to dinner last night, and literally, this is a true story, like the chef's, or the waiter told me, oh yeah, this has tomatoes in it. The chef was just at some farm last week and handpicked these tomatoes themselves. Like, you're not going to have that at a Cheesecake Factory. They've got 7,000 items on the menu. You're going to have frozen stuff and, you know, things that maybe are a little past their prime, and it's exactly the same thing. These are perishable goods, and it goes back, it's just the fact that it doesn't do you any good to be holding on to inventory that's not sold. Right. Your store should be as empty as possible, except for the product that's flowing through that POS system. That's it. Yeah.
I agree. And then, you know, just getting back to like the merchandising factor, you know, being able to actually look in your displays and see the different products versus having 700 products crammed into a display with no differentiation, everything running into each other.
Cannibalizing each other.
Yeah, how are you supposed to make a decision when everything is just running into each other?
How do you tell a story as a bud tender when you've got to, like, oh, you see that thing there? It's between those two, but oh, you can't really see it. Let me reach there and knock 20 things over, and there's no like, you know, shelf design or anything. It's just this messy blob. Yeah, no, I mean, I think especially if you have in-house brands or brands that you partner with, being able to give them the visibility that they need requires you to keep your load down to a certain degree.
Yeah, and how can you expect your bud tenders to be knowledgeable about 700 SKUs?
Not possible.
Not possible.
No, they're just gonna revert back to the, you know, whatever their default is.
Right.
They're either gonna talk out of their butt on it, or they're gonna just talk about the products that they know. And look, if there's products they like and know, why don't you carry those and not the other shit that they don't like?
Right.
Let them sell those. They're good at it. They're passionate about it. Let's get in deeper with those guys, right?
Yeah.
Let's get better deals. Let's have more interaction, more collaboration. Let's have them hook our bud tenders up and show them love. Our bud tenders will show them love back. It'll become a synergy instead of just, hey, everybody, bring your products in here and we'll pay you money, and we may or may not make money off of it. Right. And then you're going to hit us up every month like, hey, you want to get that back up to that. You know, you had 100 units, you've sold 2 of them. You want to get another 2 units there to get back up to the 100, even though it's been 6 months? Right. No, thank you.
talk about the importance of training in this industry, right? Like these people generally who are coming to work in the facilities are not coming from cannabis, right? They're coming from elsewhere. How are we getting people up to speed, knowing what their jobs are, and being efficient at them?
There's a gauntlet in the cannabis industry. I didn't coin this phrase, but you have to go through it in the beginning, right? You have to go through it. It's like 9 to 12 months of just, when you're talking sort of a higher level position, just to get to a starting point.
Right.
Certainly not a experienced expert in it or anything like that, but
right.
just being able to even hold a conversation. If you're less than a year in, like, you don't know anything, bottom line. It's, too much complexity. But so I think there's like a sort of school of hard knocks training that needs to happen, but there's also business training that needs to happen for everybody, just like any other business. And I think if a company focuses on investing in its people, and that doesn't necessarily mean monetarily, but also like education opportunities, which could be something as simple as a discussion, or having a bi-weekly training session where you go over certain fundamentals of business, or like how to, having your store managers know how to read a P&L as an example, right? They are better at their job if they understand financial documents. They don't need to be an expert in it, but they need to be able to read that simplistic version, and so that they can look at their financials of their store and really understand what they're looking at.
Yep.
And that takes them away from just focusing on that top line revenue, and they can start looking at the bottom line revenue and all the numbers in between, and see where are the areas that we can get more efficient and that we need to improve on. So I think all that's important. I think getting up to speed on technology is crucial. That's a big hang up in the cannabis industry. Not everybody's technologically savvy. If you're trying to operate without using, Google Docs and, preferably an ERP if you have the resources for it, and all the other stuff, then you're really going to be behind and spending a lot more money than you need to, and spending a lot more time than you need to doing stuff inefficiently. So, yeah, I think, but it all comes back to company culture. If you care about your people, then you're going to train them because it makes them better at what they do. It gives them more career advancement opportunity, and it makes your company better. So it's kind of a no-brainer.
Sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned technology, and when I got involved in the rec market, I didn't realize exactly how much technology, specifically like at the retail level, but obviously each department has its own software that operates. Like, how the fuck are you supposed to pick a software? There's so many out there. We've gone through a number of them. I think every cannabis company that I talk to has also gone through a number of them, and it's an arduous task switching from one to the other, right?
Yeah, it is, and that's part of the problem with not picking the right one up front. As time goes on and as you scale, it becomes more complex and costly to switch to another system. However, staying on a system that sucks is really costly in and of itself too. At my last company, I actually built, I led the development of a company-wide ERP. So ERP is a enterprise resource planning system, which basically encapsulates accounting, production management, sales, CRM, like all the types of software that you'd normally have kind of wrapped into one with a single database. So it prevents a ton of double entry, and allows like departments to work with the same data. It was an enormous project, took like a year and a half, it cost a lot of money, huge headache. Biggest challenge was getting people bought into switching from what they were already doing to this new thing. And it's hard, right? It's like you're already overworked. You've got something, it doesn't work great, but you know it. And now all of a sudden some asshole's coming in and saying, hey, you got to like learn this whole new system. It's complex, like, right? It has to be. And at first it's way more work. So you're like, oh, I'm just going to keep doing things my way, right? But the problem is it takes everybody getting on board in order to be able to make that switch. That's not an option for everybody. Not everybody has millions of dollars to put into creating their own custom software like that. But what I'll tell you is going through that process taught me a lot about some of the shortfalls of the technology that's out there. I think things are getting better now. I think some companies are sort of breaking away from the pack, but a lot of cannabis tech is just very primitive, and it's got the same immaturity as some of the operators do, and they just kind of capitalize on the fact that they're in a niche and that there's not as much competition as your Oracles and your SAPs and whatnot. but I think it's crucial, and I think that spending that time, having someone on the team that knows how to vet those things and spending the time vetting them and making sure that you're getting the best option up front, and not just thinking about what do I need today, but what am I going to need a year from now, so that you don't just outgrow it and you're right back to square one.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. I think more companies need to do that, but also need to get really good at Google Sheets in the meantime, because you can run a pretty mean operation to a pretty big scale off of Google Sheets if you're good enough. I've done it, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, I think one thing that you said there that really makes a lot of sense is that guys who look like me should not pick software out for the company.
Oh, you'd be surprised, man. There's some bearded guys that can code with the best of them.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it's like anything else. You know, you got to know what your strengths are. You got to know what your strengths aren't, and you got to surround yourself with people that have the strengths that you don't have. That's what makes a good team.
Absolutely.
And then have the right person. You know, not be like I know everything,
Right.
because nobody knows everything. And so figuring out who's the most knowledgeable about a particular subject and making sure that they have a voice in that decision. I know you're an investor, like you probably know Ray Dalio. He's got that book, Principles, one of my favorite books. That guy's a genius with the way that he sort of organized his company decision-making process. He engineered it to include not just like it's a combination of your track history and then other, like your personality traits, where your experiences are, all that kind of stuff kind of comes together in this scoring card, which they have like a computer that automates it or something. But basically, whenever they have a decision to make, it like ranks people based on these criteria. And so they'll give more credence to certain people based off of like, A, what their history's been with decisions. Were their decisions good? Of course, that's important.
Right.
Do they have relevant experience in that area? Do they even know what they're talking about? And you know, if it's a decision that requires a strong-headed commander to make a good decision, is that guy gonna have that you know, type of personality? Is that girl gonna be able to like push that needle forward, or are we looking at someone that's more of a console and maybe it would be better for different types of decisions? So you don't necessarily have to get that advanced, but I do think that making sure that you recognize the strengths in your team and who has what and letting them have a voice is important. Got to keep the ego out of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think kind of like the big name in cannabis tech space has always been Weed Maps, right? Like everybody knows Weed Maps. They've had a monopoly on this for the entire lifetime of the rec market. Like where are we heading? Is Weed Maps going to keep dominating? Is there anything coming up that's going to give them a run for their money? Are people going to have to continue to pay $30,000-$40,000 a month to be number one on Weed Maps in their market?
Little image slapped on the screen. Yeah. No, I mean, you know, I think that what I was talking about earlier with the menus, there's some companies out now, Timber and Dispense are the two that I know of that have a more robust e-commerce solution that allows you to SEO your individual product pages, which you couldn't do before with other menu systems, right? And
with
so
the iFrame,
right?
iFrames,
So you know, with an iFrame, you basically have a website inside of another website. So that first layer of website has all the search engine can only search that. It can't search the next level. Right. So any information in there, it might as well not even exist as far as the search engine is concerned. So by bringing that up to the top level, now individual dispensary websites can actually compete for ranking with Weed Maps. So unless someone just types in Weed Maps, they go online, I'm going to buy weed, I'm going to type in weedmaps.com and then search on there. I don't think most people do that.
Right.
Some people do, but I think most people are like everyone else, they search Google for things. So if you're searching Google for something, Steezy Pod as an example, right? Where can I buy Steezy? It's going to pull up, and usually Weed Maps at the top, so that's why they navigate to Weed Maps, right? And then they might do a bunch of stuff on there and search and find new things or whatever, but they're already on the website at that point.
Right.
So if you can capture them from Google by ranking, let's say you carry Steezy and you want to rank that product and you actually rank higher than Weed Maps, well, now they're going to click on yours potentially, and if they do that, maybe they'll go explore other products on your site. If you've got delivery or whatever you have, you know, delivery preferably, then they click on there, they add it to the cart, and all of a sudden you're capturing all that, and you do not have to pay Weed Maps a cent. So
I like it. Yeah,
I mean, you know, Weed Maps serves its purpose, and I think it'll be a great option for some companies, and other companies maybe it's not. You know, it shouldn't be the only option. Let's put it that way. Like people need different choices, and to make the best ones for themselves. and it's never good to have a monopoly. Never good for the customer. So yeah.
One other thing at the retail level that I think about, and something that that hasn't come to fruition yet, is that people have said that the Amazon effect will take over cannabis retail. Everybody will switch to delivery at some point, like they've done with everything else. I mean, Amazon is an interesting example of another vertically integrated company, right? Like, there are not a lot of them out there. Oil and gas, Amazon, Apple, and then the cannabis industry. Will the cannabis industry switch to a delivery-based model? I mean, you have companies like Ease in California, but it didn't launch in Michigan, right? It didn't work.
Well, and Ease had a lot of challenges. I mean, it started out as like a marketplace, right? And they would essentially collaborate with deliveries in California and say, hey, do you want to be like an Ease delivery hub?
Right.
And then they had their portfolio of brands. The delivery in question would carry those brands. People would order off the website, and it would be fulfilled from the delivery. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I think the state cracked down on that, and they had to pivot to basically being an operator like anyone else. And in Michigan, my understanding is that they're also working on that operator angle, which is, it's now they're competing with everyone else, so it's more challenging to really take on that huge, massive market share really quickly. That being said, yeah, I mean, I think brick and mortar has a space. I'd like to see it continue because I think there is a certain interaction and like ability to sort of portray yourself to the customer that you lose with delivery service, especially if we get to the point that eventually it's just a box dropped on your porch like Amazon. But delivery is definitely a huge part of any modern company, and I think people need to figure out how to do it, because if they're just brick and mortar, as time goes on, absolutely they're going to find themselves getting outpaced by folks that can deliver to people's doorstep, especially in states where there's municipalities that won't allow licenses. If you deliver, you could be next door and just deliver to them, and then you're still able to service those people. So,
did you know that Amazon will deliver inside your garage now?
I heard that.
Through Bluetooth on your fucking garage door opener.
I have no interest in that.
That's so creepy. I had to opt out of that the other day.
Yeah, I heard there's I don't know, Walmart will actually come inside your house and like put the groceries in your fridge for you. Like, can I pay them not to do that?
This is not good. Not good.
Someday there's gonna have like a service where they'll come like take you out of your own bed, like, wheelchair you around because you're too lazy to get up. It's crazy.
Come wipe my ass and give me a shower.
Right.
I guess when I think about it, it's like, will the cannabis market become so commoditized that people just order it offline because they know that they're always going to get the same thing? There's still so much variation in cannabis products, right? People like going into the stores. They like the experience. We have people who come in the stores every day. Like, they would go to the liquor store and buy their tall can or whatever. They come in, they buy a pre-roll. You have people who come in a couple times a week. You have people who come in once a month. But I think it's like, is the experience kind of a novelty at this point, or does that experience
I go to the
remain?
grocery store all the time, and there's people in there. I mean, you can go on Instacart and buy almost anything. So.
I've never done that before.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think I think a lot of people like social interaction. I think that the pandemic really put that to the forefront of like social isolation. It's horrible. It's funny at first. You're like, I hate people anyway, but no, like we're humans. We're designed to be around other people, and I think some people really crave that interaction. And for some people, their dispensary visit, those people that come in every day, some of them, that's their only time out of the house, right? Like, especially if someone's sick and that's kind of like their daily medicine trip, that might be the only time that they're even interacting with someone. So that's going to be really important for them. They're not going to get that necessarily from a delivery. So again, I can't see the future, but I definitely hope that brick and mortar continues to have a place, and I have a hard time believing it'll go away completely, because I think there's always going to be a need for an in-person interaction, and there's also a learning curve with cannabis, and if you don't know what you're looking for, you can't really order it online very easily, and you want to go talk to somebody about it and figure out what you're going to buy. I think that's where bud tenders play a big part, and you don't get that with the delivery.
Yeah, and there's also like especially in our stores, I see personal relationships between the bud tenders and the customers who are regulars. It's like Cheers, right? Come in, hey Bob, how's it going?
It's almost a service-based business, even though it's a product retailer. It's got a lot of service components to it if you do it right.
Right.
And that's, yeah, I mean, like service businesses, I think, you know, there's even challenges there. I mean, in the gym world, right, there's like these at-home gym, Peloton and Tonal and all this stuff where you can do stuff in your own house and have like a video service, and a lot of people have transitioned to that, but there's still people that like they want to be in person.
Yeah.
And they want that personal touch, and you can't get that. So I think if we lean more into that in cannabis, we can sort of enjoy that same type of atmosphere.
Absolutely. I agree. I wish we could see the future.
I know.
But we
Someday.
can't. One day. As soon as we
Maybe
get
that'll
the,
be our next product. Time
Once
machine.
we get the Neuralink, Elon.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate you coming by to chat today. It was enlightening conversation.
Yeah, anytime.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to see you, my man.